Right, today in Listen Up, obviously everybody listening to this, probably Scotland, New Zealand, America and around the world, have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had epidemiologists on to speak about it, and today we've got one of our political faces on to talk about it as well, with Marion Fellows. Marion, how are you?
I'm very well. A bit lonely, but otherwise okay.
I know you'll be. The Zoom call has literally become, for most people, the only way of communicating, especially for people that are shielding and stuff. Like, I can only imagine what it's been like for them.
Yeah, it's not easy. I'm on my own, so it's not easy. It's actually weird when you actually see people, even if
No, it's like when you go to like Lidl's and things like that, and it's like people are even if they're reaching across the shelf to get like their dinner for the night, and they're like, oh, stay back a bit. But I suppose it's just the weird times we're living in.
Yeah. I suppose one of the joys for me is I haven't been going to Lidl or any other supermarket that is available. My children are very, what's the word, protective of me. So they'd rather I keep myself in as much as I can. I'm not, and I do. But I find it quite strange. I took my car for a service, and that was the first time I've done that. And that was the first time I'd really gone into anywhere since lockdown. So it was quite a strange experience, especially trying to wear a mask. But I think it's good that we do it. I really do.
Yeah, well, that was sort of like my first point as we start this discussion is masks. It's obviously been the big talking point. I know in America is especially a big one, just with the confusion over masks over there, and it's just the same in the UK. Obviously in Scotland, they're to be enforced on public transport.
Yes.
Could you sort of explain us what the official ruling is for masks in Scotland?
Well, I don't know if you can take me as official, but my understanding is
more official than us, so it's fine.
The recommendation, yes, it's mandatory in public transport, and it's advised in places where you can't be as socially distant as you want. You mentioned being in a supermarket, someone stretching across you. So wearing a mask doesn't protect you, but wearing a mask protects other people, and I think it's really good. I mean, I'm in a much different age group, as you can tell, but it protects more vulnerable people, and I think we all have a social responsibility to do that, because perceived wisdom, and in the majority of cases, if you too caught COVID-19, you wouldn't get it as badly as someone as old as me could. That's hugely, I mean, there are exceptions like everything, but that's in the main, that would be what would happen. So, which is why my kids are very, very protective of me, because I'm in the older age group, which would suffer more probably if I caught it. So, yeah, I don't like admitting that.
No, it's absolutely fine. I like to make you feel a bit old in this from time to time, James, don't I?
Just now and again,
Just now
you
and
have
again.
your moments.
I do have my moments, but just with masks and stuff, obviously it won't affect people like me perhaps as much, just on the usual forms of how this virus seems to work. But how does it make you feel like when you see people who aren't wearing masks and stuff? Obviously it's not mandatory everywhere, but you would like to think common sense would prevail in most cases.
I do. I find it quite strange. I think sometimes because people think that things are getting easier, and it's we haven't defeated it. The spike, well, it's not a spike, it's a cluster, and there is a big difference between a spike and a cluster in Dumfries and Galloway. It just shows that it's still there, and it's absolutely true. And I think what folk forget is that until we actually get a vaccine that will work, the chances of COVID coming back are quite high. I mean, it's happened. Okay, it was 2 folk that flew into New Zealand that brought it. We can't close the borders, and I don't want to get into that huge long political argument, but there is a border between Scotland and England, And there are places like Leicester where they've discovered that there is definitely a spike there. And the problem is that the data that is being given out in England, I mean, it's almost inconceivable that the local authority didn't know. They were working on different figures and they didn't know how much COVID-19 had taken a hold again. And, you know, it's only when they got told, about 10 days after there was a slight announcement, a mention of it, that Leicester's really going back into lockdown. And listening to Jason Leach this morning on the radio, and he's saying, you know, well, they weren't too bothered about the cluster, and well, of course they're bothered, but it wasn't unexpected, the cluster in Dumfries and Galloway, and that's the kind of thing they've been planning for, so it has to be managed. And I suppose everyone, I feel, has a responsibility to be responsible and to wear a mask. It's not about protecting yourself, it's about protecting other people. And I've got 4 young granddaughters, and the chances of them having catching it and being really ill with it are quite small. But the babies have died from it, young people have died from it. And I think we have to just be sensible. I mean, it's a horrible word to use, isn't it? Because it's one that old grannies like me use all the time, you know, you have to be sensible. But actually you do. So I'll say the word again, sensible. I think wearing masks, it's a bit old-fashioned, and I'm a bit old-fashioned. It's showing consideration for other folk.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, because for me, in my experience of being out, and it's not very often, I want to say it's the minority of people that aren't being sensible. But to be true, there is a lot of people out there who still aren't being sensible, aren't wearing masks, aren't adhering to social distancing. So it's just a case, I think, of reinforcing that message, because I don't think you'll be able to convince everybody to wear one. But if you convince at least the majority of people, then you'll be able to get somewhere quicker.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in London quite a lot, as I was before lockdown. You saw people, tourists especially, even before the pandemic hit London, that wore, and they were mainly Asian, that wore masks whenever they went, and you'd kind of look at them, you know, and you were on the tube and they were wearing a mask, and you think, a bit odd. But actually, they've had lots of experience in pandemics of one kind and another, and that's one of the things that they took out of it. You know, places like Singapore, China, that it helps keep other people safe and not quite stop the virus, but at least it gives you a level of protection that you wouldn't have otherwise. Yeah.
One of the things that I've seemed to find so far is I live in an area where we've not really been too badly affected with it. We've not had any deaths as far as I'm aware of yet, and even just people being hospitalised has been fairly low. Do you think that kind of can lead to a little bit of complacency, particularly with younger people, when it comes to masks and the like?
Yeah, I think definitely is a bit of a divide. I mean, I live in a very quiet bit, and my next door neighbour's 79 or something, and she's not been anywhere, and she's very accepting of the rules. She's very accepting of the fact that her liberty has been curtailed somewhat. And she's very grateful she always had a weekly Tesco delivery before COVID. And yeah, and I think I suppose it is one of the things with aging is that you do pick up a lot more life experience, and I know we're always trying to pass it on, and not everybody wants to listen and have life experience. Well, I was the same, you know. But actually, there is I think, a bit of a divide, because a lot of young folk don't see the point, because if they get it, it'll be like the flu, and you know. But it's a bit like think about your granny, your granddad. It's not about you, it's about your family, and you know, anybody in your family that has a respiratory illness or has a bad chest, you know, something like that. You're helping to protect them. When we saw how bad it was getting, I mean, for example, again, there's 36 places across the UK that have got quite high incidence still. One of them is Westminster, and I don't think it helps. And I'm trying not to be party political here, although I can do that at the drop of a hat. But it's very noticeable that there are people in government who don't think. I mean, Boris was happy to announce that he shook hands with everybody and he did all that. And I thought, I wouldn't want anyone to get it. You know, it was almost inevitable at that point, because it was the spike in London, that people like that would go, Boris and Matt Hancock were going to catch it. So there was going to be a higher percentage of people catching it. And it just shows you that you have to be careful. And it's self-preservation, basically, isn't it? So if you want to look at it from that point of view, yeah, no one is invincible. And although he's now doing press-ups, and please don't ask me to do that.
No, we don't usually get that to do them. Maybe for
it's like a macho thing, isn't it? Where I'm okay now and I've got over it, and they're talking about it. It's very interesting for me, because I'm a political nerd. It's very interesting that the Speaker has ruled, and they've dropped the 2 meters in England. You're still supposed to be 2 meters apart, but they're not quite so. I can't remember the exact wording, but they've said 1 meter's in the realms of okay. But the House of Commons, the Speaker is keeping the 2 meter rule in Westminster in the House of Commons, and that just tells you, that there are forces everywhere who want things to move on. And yes, I get the economic impact. Believe me, I get the emails. I lived through Thatcher. I understand. I'm really old. My father first memory was the Great Depression, the general strike in 1926, and and my parents lived right through the Depression. I understand, but if you haven't got health, you haven't got very much at all. And I think the more social conservatism with a very, very small c we have, the better. We need, if we open everything up and then there's a second spike, that's going to be much, much worse. And I think overall in Scotland, I think people get that.
I think that's reflected by the sort of low amount of transmission rate in Scotland just now. If you look, there was an interesting sort of diagram, sort of the rate of transmission in Scotland compared to England, for example, and it was light yellow means 0 to 5 per 100,000 in capita, and so on and so forth. In Scotland, 0 to 5 on pretty much across the border, whereas in England there was a lot more clusters. And I know England's perhaps slightly bigger, but it shows that at least Scotland seems to have taken on board this messaging.
I think it's one of my favourite topics. Scotland is a small country. It makes it much snippier, and able to do things. And to. I was on the education committee for a while at Westminster, and it was just English education, and it always amazed me how everything was so different and so much more unwieldy. For David Cameron announced that Holocaust education would be mandatory in English schools, except that he couldn't do it in academies, he couldn't do it in free schools, he couldn't do it, Whereas here, if there's something to be added to the curriculum, it generally goes Scotland-wide, and it can go quite quickly because we only have 32 local authorities. And that makes things a bit more manageable. Doesn't mean there aren't differences, but it does make it a bit easier to implement stuff when you're a smaller country.
Right. Are you going to say something, James? Or
No, on you go.
Cool. One of the things obviously talking about sort of the economic impact is with the furlough scheme. Me and you, James, are currently on that just now, as are millions of other people. I think I've seen on your Twitter, Marion, it's 10,600. And you have Motherwell and Wishaw. Keir Starmer sort of been calling for that in the Commons most recently, sort of for an extension as it begins to get tapered down from this month.
Yeah.
Your sort of thoughts on that?
It is. Westminster is very London-centric, southeast-centric. Even they now have the Red Wall was breached, and you have people in MPs in places like Sedgefield places that you would never imagine. I can't believe that Anna Turley didn't get back in Redcar and stuff, Redcar, as they say. You know, places like that, and are still looking across and seeing people standing up and saying they're from some of Scunthorpe, places like that. You know, I just really, and that's, if everything is okay there, they assume it's exactly the same everywhere else. And try as you might, you can't really break through that. And for some, and this goes for Labour, Lib Dem, English MPs as well, they don't think, I mean, they quite like the jobs, you know, they're good, odd at times, but you know, they really quite like us, you know, we're good fun and all of that, but they don't understand that there is a totally different dynamic. I mean, Thatcher did a lot to it in Scotland, that, you know, she brought in the idea of self, and if I'm okay, that's fine, you know, and it's all about looking after yourself and whereas in Scotland there's a long tradition of the common weal. Now, that's before the common weal, the think tank. A lot more. There's a long tradition of the common weal, that you always get looked out for other folk. It was okay to make your own way and to be good, but and to do well for yourself and your family, but you always kept a wee eye on what was going on round about. And one of the most interesting things about becoming the MP here was, for a start, I didn't ever expect to get elected. I know that seems quite strange, but yeah. I mean, I stood against Jack McConnell in 2007, knowing I had no chance, you know, but you do it. And I refused to believe that I would get elected in 2015, though the polls were saying fabulous. Couldn't take anything for granted. But after I got elected, I decided that the first thing I was going to do was to look at local organisations, their sector, different things in different organisations, whether they had a national branch in Motherwell and Wishaw, or whether it was just a local thing. And the number of people and organisations I found that spent their lives just helping other people, it's heartwarming, and it really is. But they saw a need and they decided to do something about it, and that's an amazing thing for people to do. And so we set up a poverty action network, and all we do, it's like speed dating, or you know, we hire a room, say to local organisations, come and talk to each other, because we found out that there's lots of these organisations doing different things and they don't know about each other to some extent. So if you can provide a forum where they can all meet and go, oh yeah, right, okay, and they, you know, they make connections, and it's worked really well. We don't, you know, once every quarter or something, and it allows people to talk to each other, as I've said. So we even had we have folk from the local council, North Lanarkshire Council, Money Matters folk that do benefits checks for you and all of that, and down to carers associations, food bank, you know, anybody that's dealing with poverty in any size, shape or form. I think there's over 50 organisations come at various times. So that was really interesting, and that whole idea of looking out for each other is very common. It happens. I'm not saying it doesn't happen in England or Wales, but it's kind of always been the case, because in Scotland there's always been a huge section of the community that isn't as well off as other folk. And you know, if you're brought up in a mining village, everybody knew you know, and again, I mean, I could say the same about most parts of Scotland. And I was really struck by the diversity, the size of some of the organisations. It was just literally somebody saw something needed done and do, and you know, and it wasn't for their own personal gain.
Yeah, and I think with the furlough scheme that's why it's been so important, because a lot of these organisations that are then helping other people, they've not got the money to do stuff now. I mean, it's not just them that's been affected. Every business has been affected, but when you start losing these pillars of the community simply through a health pandemic that it's nobody's fault, that's perhaps the argument for why the furlough scheme needs to. It can't continue forever, obviously, but if it continues,
well, because it is a devolved. Scotland is devolved, and health is devolved, and lots of things are devolved to the Scottish government. Then there will be divergences, and England has probably gone off more in its own tangent than Wales, Northern Ireland, although Northern Ireland is linked with Southern Ireland, but also tried to keep in touch with what's going on in the mainland. And it's this Four Nations thing is, yeah, it's Four Nations, but there hasn't been always the consultation.
No.
And when you've got one nation that is far, far bigger than the other three, you know, might isn't always right though. And that's something I think that we need to bring forward a bit more.
Yeah, I think the sort of the messaging has obviously been a big talking point. Obviously grabbing the headlines and things like just with England's messaging being different from Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales at separate times and things like that. Does that make your job as an MP harder to tell your constituents, sort of, even though you've got Boris Johnson on the BBC saying one thing, you've got Nicola right on after it saying another thing? It
can be, and actually quite often people take on board the message they want to hear.
Yeah, I think so.
You know, but I think the polls show that the messaging in Scotland has been generally very much clearer and more accepted by the population. I mean, the Dominic Cummings thing just threw it all into absolute shone a light on almost the whole idea of might right. You know, I mean, I would do this, and some of the arguments that were made to actually saying, well, you know, he went on a drive to test his eyesight, you know,
it doesn't.
Yeah, well, you know, I didn't, because I did an eye operation. You know, I understand, but actually, it's on an aside, the level of eyesight you actually need to be able to pass a driving test and to keep driving is not that high. It's just not that high. I was quite horrified to discover that. But when I stopped feeling comfortable, I stopped driving, but there was a period when I didn't drive for about 6 weeks. I had a lens replaced, you know. But again, it's almost the sense of entitlement. And I think a lot of people were genuinely horrified by that. Not just here, but all over the UK. But, you know, what is it? Today's news is wraps chips tomorrow, you know, so it's amazing how quickly we forget about these things. And I think the constant message, I'm going to be very interested today. I mean, I'm interested every week, but today especially because we're all waiting for better news today at 12:30, you know, with the First Minister's announcements. And there was disappointment last week that it didn't happen just as quickly. But I think there was also the recognition that in general, the majority of folk are happier to wait and be safe or safer than to just bringe ahead. Is that a good Scots word? Bringe ahead and do it, you know. Because when you get folk like Jacob Rees-Mogg standing, you know, in the House of Commons and saying, we have to set an example, you know, we are MPs and we are the mother of all parliaments and we are wonderful and we have to be there. But I think I'm better setting the example I have now. Here's a big confession. I'm over 70. And over 70 were asked to, you know, stay at home. No, it's great. I don't look it. It's fabulous. I've got my father's skin. I'm very pleased. But that's why I think I haven't gone to Westminster because the advice here is that I shouldn't. So I won't until I'm not a big rule breaker, but I do have a mind of my own. But I think as someone in the position I've got, it's up to me to set an example. And so I tried very hard to do that. You know, I mean, I've got 4 granddaughters that I don't get to see, and I've seen one because I'm bubbling with that family, but I've got 2, and I've seen another one for a distance, and I've got 2 I haven't seen at all. Well, it's Zoom, but it's not the same.
No, like, even things like this, like we're speaking about as well, James, like even with like media stuff, you can't get that same rapport. I don't think you get some. That doesn't mean all stuff isn't as informative, but you definitely can't get that face-to-face rapport with people. Like
You miss a lot of the very subtle
body language. Body language is the big thing, because your face can tell a lot, but when you see people twiddling with hands and stuff and all that, you can't see any of that.
Always happen in these meetings. You're wondering what they're wearing underneath. You know, I was in the chamber virtually, and I wouldn't go outside, but I was wearing shorts. You know, it was that hot style. You know, but you know, it's a bit. You know, you've got a nice top on and looking very smart, and I think, thank goodness I'm not standing up. You know.
Very much. What time do you get up at, James?
This morning, 10:25. Yeah, I'm still wearing my pajamas.
No, I've never done that one. I've been tempted a few times, and I mean, it's just as well. Sometimes it's not smelly vision, isn't it?
Oh, I know.
No offense, snaps, none whatsoever. You know, I just think that you're waking up a bit later and I've got a meeting in 10 minutes. You know, you just.
Well, we've had a few. See, to be fair, with the common stuff, right? Up until maybe about 7 months ago, I wasn't very interested in political things, just because just not my interest. But I found it really interesting with the Commons. Obviously, there were bits where it was just like Keir Starmer facing Boris Johnson, and I think the interesting dynamic was that I find it hilarious whenever you watch the Prime Minister's questions, you've got all the people going, yeah. There was none of that. Like Keir Starmer would ask a question, and then Boris Johnson it forces the opposition to answer the questions without any backing, without any loud cheering.
Well, the theory was that the reason, originally, when Parliament, we didn't do anything, and then they'd set up the virtual Parliament, and you could do almost anything and everything that you did in a real Parliament. You didn't have to be there. I could vote, I could take part in debates. The one thing they held back was bill committees because they wanted an escape clause. And then after 3 weeks, after Whitsun recess, they didn't renew the orders that they needed to have in place to do the virtual Parliament. And they actually said, no, you can't possibly vote. We're not going to let you vote. We're not going to let you take part in debates because, of course, you can't stand up and intervene. And the craze in Bob, oh dear God, I've got thighs of steel, you know, because when you're in the chamber, you bob up and down to try and catch the speaker's eye. It is ridiculous. Now we have call lists, and they tell you when you'll be on. Well, not quite when, you know, but there's a list, and you'll be after so and so, and you know that. Whereas normally you went in, and if you weren't actually written on the order paper as having a question, you didn't get taken. Unless you bobbed, and there was not a guarantee that you'd always get taken. So there's that. But they took away that. I applied for a backbench business debate on child maintenance, and I secured it, and I was going to talk because it's one of the things I'm interested in a campaign on. As an MP, you really have to. You don't have to, but it helps if you specialise in some things because you can give it much more focus, you become much more knowledgeable, and people will come to you because they know, I mean, organisations and stuff will come to you because they know you're interested and you're able to raise quite a lot of issues that way. But I can't have that now. I can't have that until I go back to Westminster. And even when in England they decided to change the 2-metre rule, they're not doing it in the Commons. The Speaker has said that nobody, he's not asking House staff to come back. They're all working, well, there's some there, but a very skeleton crew, and they're not asking anyone to go back to work. So everyone's doing Microsoft Teams or Zoom. And it's a very strange place at the moment because there's only about 37 members allowed in the chamber
Mm.
at any one time. And it is, if you're not on the order paper, you can't go into the chamber. You can be in you can be in Westminster. I've just hit the space bar. Have I muted myself?
No, you're fine.
No, you're all good.
That's fine. That's my favourite trick, you know, you learn these things. And so people are talking about, oh, they have to be there and they have to do things, and then they get there and realise they're sitting in their office and they can only get into the chamber, you know, very irregularly. So it's very strange, but the taking away the voting, I've given a proxy to the Chief Whip, you know, so he can vote on my behalf. They had to change the way we vote because it's a ludicrous system anyway.
Mm.
But, they physically, there was a lot of, I mean, I've been stuck in what's effectively a corridor with about 600 other people crammed in during Brexit votes, and obviously they couldn't have done it. So they've changed the way we vote, and they've changed it a couple of times now. And you keep thinking, at one point, for 3 glorious weeks, all we did was press a button, you know, like modern people do.
That sounds very nice.
One of the big things that jumped out at me through all this, particularly with the kind of the 1 and 2 metre rule stuff, I question how often a Jacob Rees-Mogg or a Boris Johnson have been in a supermarket during normal business hours. I mean, I worked in retail for a long, long time, so I know exactly what a supermarket looks like before a politician visit, and it's a different world. And I really question just, they don't see the people going in and leaning over the top of others to get their things, and as much as the social distancing goes on, it doesn't really in shops.
And of course,
the
folk that work there, they're at most risk.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to actually say that, commend folk that have gone out. I mean, we've talked a lot about, you know, we used to clap for the NHS and for carers, and I have huge respect for carers. My husband had carers before he died, you know, and I know these women, and mainly women, huge majority are women, they really do care. They do what it says on the tin, you know. But there is a whole bunch of folk in the Commons who have no idea how real people live. Now, I'm quite middle class now, you know. But I was brought up in a council house in Ayr. My dad was a milkman, my mother was a cleaner. I was the first in my family to go to uni. I mean, I'm huge. I mean, I got a grant. Yeah, I wasn't that old. I got a grant to go to uni. My parents both left school at 14, and they were both bright, but I mean, there was never any possibility of them doing anything. And the one thing they wanted for their family was an education, and they sacrificed, because, you know, what's she doing? What, you know, in your house, my mother would meet a friend. Why is she not out working? You know, I was 16 and I was still at school. My granny thought there was something not quite right with me. You know, the concept of staying on and going to higher education was just alien. But I've been there, you know, and after I got my, I've stood at the, you know, stirring the pot in the cooker and thinking, where do I get the money for the lecky bill? You know, but I went down there, and I like people, and I don't like put labels on people. It's counterproductive. But I thought, okay, you know, I'll have a. I'll never forget David Cameron looking over at the 56 of us in those days, and just you could see him looking and think, what have we here? You know, and we were a great representation of Scotland because we were all different and different ages and different education and just different, you know. Anyway, there was a debate, and I can't remember what it was about, but there was this woman stood up and said, why can't people on benefits just save? What?
I think it's quite as easy.
You had no idea, and I think that's one of the things that's come out of this. There are so many people who have now had to go into things like universal credit, who had a kind of attitude that people on benefits chose to be on benefits, and that they were scamming the system, and they were all, you know, David Cameron and George Osborne fostered that attitude. You know, you're getting up to go to your work in the morning, and the next door curtains are still shut, and they're lying in their beds. Never thought dawned on them they might be in back shift or night shift, you know. And there was this kind of pejorative thing. And benefits. I mean, I'm on benefits. I was quite appalled when I heard that, but apparently now pensions are benefits. So, you know. And they don't get how, a lot of folk didn't realise how hard it is, how difficult it is, how impoverishing it is in spirit, to your spirit, as well as, I remember reading back in 2000, you know, in the financial crisis, and I remember reading a story in the Sunday Post, of all things, and it said that there was this couple, they'd moved back to Dundee, they'd lived in London, and first they had a great life. And then the husband was made redundant, the man was made redundant. And then the wife got sick. And from being reasonably well off, having a very high standard of living, they went to absolutely not knowing how to manage. And there's so many people now, and I've been there, where you're one pay away from disaster, you know, and there's lots of people like that. And this is my big worry about after COVID-19, because we're already seeing the devastation caused by the lockdown, by the pandemic, where aviation, the people working there, jobs are going. The lockdown has accelerated what's happened in retail, apart from food. And we really do have to look at a different way of doing things, whether that's a universal basic income of some kind, because there are so many versions of that. We need to look at how people can do more than survive, but how we can create jobs for the future and for young people. I spent a long time teaching in further education. I was an FE lecturer. It's a fabulous job, hard work. The opportunity to watch people have a second chance and grow. And, you know, it's always a joy when I bumped into ex-students. Well, not always, they didn't all like me. But, you know, to see that, especially folk who'd come back to education, because when they were at school, they didn't get it, they didn't particularly want it. And then after maybe a few years not being able to do very much, they realised that if they went back and got a bit of paper that said, you know, I can do this, it really enhanced their life chances. It's a privilege to be part of that, to be honest.
No, definitely. It sounds really enlightening. I think the thing with the furlough scheme that I know, having spoke to people, I mean, I'm in full-time employment, but people older than me with mortgages to pay and things like that have all said, how long will we be paying back for this furlough scheme? It's been great. It's kept some people in a job, but am I now going to be, how long am I going to be paying for that?
I mean, you get to the bit where you see companies now paying dividends but paying people off, the worrying trend. And I don't know how, well, I do know, I do have a vision for the future that doesn't include that, but it doesn't include us tied to Westminster, because it's almost endemic. I think, not history, but 2014 taught me that there was a better way to do things. I think when people started to look at alternative futures, there are other ways of doing it. And I sincerely hope that my grandchildren grow up in a better world. I mean, there's parts of it, I mean, the march of the robots, etc., etc. You know, We're looking at work being different. We're looking at all sorts of different scenarios, but we have to find a way of giving people a useful life, but a life that inspires them to help other folk, I suppose. And I'm not looking for an ideal world, but I think the system we have just now in this pandemic has probably proven that it doesn't work for the majority of folk. You know, is it the number of rich, really rich people who have got so much richer during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think like Jeff Bezos or something is cleared. I've not got the figures to hand, but it's a crazy figure. Like people like that have made to.
Because once you get above a certain level of income, you just sit there and it just grows and grows and grows. You know,
must be nice.
You know,
What is it?
It's not everything.
But
it helps.
Definitely helps, aye. James, I've not got anything left, but you had one question. Just...
Yeah, the one thing for me also as a football fan, we've seen down south there was a lot of talk about the Liverpool Atletico Madrid game, and I believe it was Cheltenham Gold Cup. Up here we also had there was the Rangers Bayer Leverkusen game, and then the Old Firm was supposed to have happened that weekend. You know, what first of all was kind of the thinking between letting the first one go and then we'll let the Sunday one happen and then we'll kind of start locking down? Was that kind of with hindsight something that was a misstep?
What do they say about hindsight? 2020 vision. Yeah. I mean, and I do think that we were still learning. And because ours isn't either as part of the UK or as Scotland itself, we're not a society that takes well to being told. You know, whereas, you know, in Singapore and Japan, China, these countries have also experienced pandemics of one kind, well, not pandemics, but epidemics of one kind or another. They have gone through that where they know that you have to isolate, you have to stay indoors, you have to wear a mask, you have to curtail your own personal freedom. And I'm not entirely convinced that the science wasn't quite there, the mood wasn't quite there. I mean, we're now getting surveys that say a lot of people aren't going to be rushing out, going and, you know, to big parties and football, big stadia or anything like that now, because they understand now the difficulties and the problems that might happen if they do that. Back in February, March, beginning of all of this, people didn't have that attitude, I don't think. And you can only govern with the consent of the people. So you can put in, you know, you can put in and try and train instructions and guidance and laws, but if people are not going to follow them, it's counterproductive. I mean, I think First Minister, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care has said, you know, we were to go back. There are things that we would do now that we didn't do then. And I think we're all, we can all do that. But I think there will be an inquiry. I think there have to be lessons learned. And this isn't, according to some scientists, this is not the first and last global pandemic. So we need to be better prepared, and we need to be able to, it's very true, the scientists give advice, it's the politicians that have to take the decisions. And people are people and they will make mistakes. But it's learning from those mistakes. So things like we cannot go back to austerity. You know, it was so unfair, and it was those who were the most vulnerable, the poorest, people with disabilities, all of that. They were the people who paid the price, and the bankers got away with what happened. We can't let that happen again. I don't think. I think people want society to be, not everyone, but there is a real mood for things to be done differently after this.
Yeah.
Am I right? I mean, I'm asking.
I think so.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think people, it was almost like people, like the big word during this has been new normal, I think. And I think that covers not just because we're going to have to adhere to social distancing and things like that. I think just our general way of life. People see this as, right, if we're going to make changes to whether it's the welfare system and things like that, now's the time for it. I know me as a young person, like, it's probably the time, because the decisions that might be taken now in the aftermath of this might affect me, might affect my children, God love them, in 10 to 15.
We should talk about intergenerational fairness some other time.
Aye.
It's a big question, a big point. Sorry, I talk too much. It's a part of my job.
No problem.
No, absolutely. It's good to have someone come on and actually make our job a lot easier instead of having to ask lots of different questions. So makes our job all the easier.
Oh well, I'm glad I made your job easier, but
no, probably the one thing I've got to close out with is obviously I am 2 years out from being at school. The return of that has been talked about recently, and how that's going to be in effect with social distancing. Having been in a school 2 years ago, I know that's pretty much borderline impossible. So what do you foresee the challenges of that are going to be?
I mean, here's a politician's answer, but it's the only one I can give you. It really is. It depends on what the circumstances are in August. Mm-hmm. We know that it's 6 weeks away now, roughly.
That's about that.
That maybe just slightly less. But 6 weeks ago, did we think we'd be where we are just now?
6 weeks ago, I think we thought the world was still going to be stood still by this point. So I mean, it just shows you how much.
It does depend, and it depends on a communal will for everybody involved in the school. You know, that's teachers, Jannies, dinner ladies, especially in secondary schools. I mean, primary schools is slightly different. But secondary school pupils, it's people being aware and wanting it to work and always putting aside differences. Now, I heard something this morning and I thought, really? Someone was on radio talking about having to make kids should be in school for longer. Now, I'm sure a lot of parents would be very happy about that. But teachers, you're going to make them work longer days. Oh, no. We'll get other people in. We'll get students maybe almost at the end of their courses, and we'll get older retired teachers to come in. But this class teacher will have to set the work. There is a limit to what everybody can do. And it has to be thought about, and it has to be coordinated. It has to be joined up. And I suppose at the end of the day, people have to want it to happen. Everyone involved has to want it to happen. I don't know. Will there be 1 metre, 2 metre rule in August when the schools go back? I don't know. I think the First Minister's going to make announcements about that sort of thing. And it's not me, saying I'm giving that away. But she gets the scientific advice. She gets, people talk to her. She makes the decision because that's how it works. I'm not at that level. But my gut feeling is that kids will go back, and yes, there won't be social distancing. It may lead to clusters, but we just have to work with what we've got and try and pull together to get through this. I think it's really, and furlough is important, as is all the other schemes, because apparently Boris Johnson has said recently that, for example, in Leicester, if people have to be furloughed again, they'll continue the payments. So that would help. So it needs to be people working together to make this work, to make things better. And that's always the case, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not really a time for party politics, although some of us can't help it.
No, I think in the last couple, obviously I think at the start of it, party politics was put to the side, but especially sort of as the lockdown has got gradually lesser, the party politics is sort of going the other way. But I suppose, like, even though we're in the middle of this work,
Good to disagree. It's good to have different opinions. But what's important is that you don't hate. You can hate somebody's opinions, but you shouldn't personalise it. That's what's needed more and more in politics. Nothing in this world really is binary.
No, not at all. James, got anything to add?
No, I'm fine with that. That's
Brilliant, Marion. Really good insight into that, and I'm sure everybody watching all have enjoyed your and appreciated your insight. So really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much for asking me on. I really enjoyed it.
No worries.
My pleasure.
Subscribe to us on Podbean, iTunes, and until next time, take it easy.